Make or break? How about make or portal? A big season for the Missouri Tigers, also a huge moment for some individual players. Let's talk about all that and notes from fall camp right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. On today's program, a lot of sloppy football here early in camp, according to Eli Drinkwitz. I want to parse all of the coaches' words coming up here later in the show. First, though, I want to remind you, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And today on the program, I want to start off by talking about some guys. I really think it's a critical season for some prominent players on the Missouri roster, to the point where if they don't produce this season, I think a move into the transfer portal this offseason is very likely forthcoming for many of the players I'm about to talk about. And I want to actually lead off here talking about the running back position. Eli Drinkwitz recently talked about that position a little bit, saying that he thinks that Marcus Carroll, Nate Noel, and Jamal Roberts really do an outstanding job in pass protection, keeping blitzers off of the ever-important quarterbacks. He also mentioned Kewan Lacey, I believe is how his first name is pronounced, the true freshman running back, a really talented player. And Drinkwitz mentioned his return game possibilities as well. But one guy who notably was not mentioned at all by Eli Drinkwitz to me is Tavoris Jones, who previously was a four-star recruit out of the state of Texas, one of the most highly ranked individual players the Tigers had ever signed in the internet recruiting era from an out-of-state perspective. So he was a real win for Drinkwitz and his staff. And yet, in his time at Missouri in 2022, well, a redshirt season for Tavoris Jones, got his feet wet a little bit, but enough to preserve his redshirt eligibility. So as far as that goes, hey, everything is all systems go, right? No big deal. True freshman, red shirts, fine. But last season, Jones did not actually appear in a ball game for Missouri. Now, he certainly did not register a carry or a target or anything like that. But again, I think even according to the official Missouri roster here, I believe Tavoris Jones did not appear in a game last season. And indeed, that is correct. And I'm now confirming that. So now this is Jones' third season in the program. It doesn't look like there's much of a path to playing time for him in this third season. Still just a sophomore, though, so it's not as though he has no time to turn it around and cash in on his significant talent. But to me, it's looking more and more likely that Tavoris Jones will probably be doing the lion's share of his work at another school, probably starting as soon as next season. Now, Jamal Roberts, the previously mentioned Jamal Roberts, a guy that the staff is, again, talking highly about. I think he's a guy that they really like his ability to, again, pass protect, do a lot of the veteran stuff, protect the football, also be an impact player on special teams as well. But for as much as the coaching staff might like Jamal Roberts, if he doesn't touch the ball more than one time this season like he did last year, well, you got to think he's a candidate to be possibly out of here in the transfer portal as well. So, again, actions often speak louder than words. And right now, the coaching staff's actions are saying that they don't like Jamal Roberts quite as much as they're talking him up, at least in the past couple off seasons. Now, there's a couple guys in the receiver room that I'm a big fan of that I have to include here too, just simply because of the amount of depth in the wide receiver room right now. Of course, with Luther Burden and Theo Weiss being the clear 1 and 2 in the receiver room right now, you've got a bunch of really talented guys after them as well, including highly experienced players like Mookie Cooper. And I think a lot of people have maybe been focusing too much, by the way, as I make a slight digression here. I think maybe too much has been made by some Mizzou fans. Oh, who's going to be the number 3 for the Tigers? Is Marquise Speedy Johnson, for example, going to bypass Mookie Cooper? Well, to me, I think both guys are going to have important roles. And whoever has the most targets or snaps there, I think is really missing the point maybe a little bit. I'm not saying that's not going to be an interesting thing to follow, but I'm just saying I think both Cooper and Speedy Johnson, for example, can both be very productive players regardless of who ultimately has the most action and targets there at that position. But back to, again, my make or portal discussion here. For as much as I like Mekhi Miller and think he's going to be an important part of the team this season and has made some clutch catches in important moments, you just have to admit, by the way this is all playing out, if Joshua Manning is really going to come on here as a redshirt freshman and maybe take some action as well, it's just hard to see. Again, I mentioned 4 guys there at the top before I even got to Josh Manning or Mekhi Miller. Let's also throw Daniel Blood into that mix as well. Again, Blood made some impressive plays last year. I like Miller and I like Blood. You just wonder, again, with new guys coming in as true freshmen this season, like Courtney Crutchfield and James Madison, among other, of course, Javen Boggs and Donovan Alubade, and, a bunch of interesting receivers coming in here over the next couple seasons for Missouri. So you just wonder if some of the depth here, the veteran depth at the top, might end up getting squeezed out a little bit. And I think Daniel Blood and Mekhi Miller could potentially be on the wrong side of that. Now, the rest of my make or portal players are mostly up front linemen who, on both sides of the ball, who are relatively veteran players that have been around the program for at least a couple seasons, but haven't totally cracked the rotation. On the offensive side of the ball, I'm talking about guys like Tristan Wilson and Mitchell Walters, who, again, have played here and there for Missouri and could be contributors this season, but right now there's just not a clear path to a starting position for either one of those young men. As I've said all offseason, well, especially recently, the left guard, center, right guard, right tackle, those positions are pretty much set in stone at this point. Only left tackle is the real intrigue here, and that's looking like a battle between Javen Richardson and Marcus Bryant. So Tristan Wilson and Mitchell Walters are going to basically have to, I hate to say it, hope for an injury. Not that they're literally going to hope for an injury, but just in terms of looking for playing time, that's basically the only realistic path. Now, on the defensive line, you're talking about, hey, speaking of guys who are very highly thought of recruits, Marquise Gracial, a guy who obviously during the recruiting process, much like Tavoris Jones, a guy that Missouri was really excited to get, and basically any program in the country would have been really excited to get. But hey, big guys, especially on the interior, sometimes they take a little bit longer to develop than other positions. So Eli Drinkwitz mentioned that Marquise Gracial and also Jalen Marshall as well were basically probably battling it out for maybe that 4th defensive tackle spot at this point. I think if either one of those guys loses that battle, I think their time at Missouri could be coming fairly short. But really, that 4th defensive tackle spot, that may not sound like much, but the way Missouri likes to rotate guys on the interior, that could be a significant position. We're talking 20, 25 snaps a game, that type of deal. So this really could be the type of season where either one of those young men, Gracial or Marshall, could either make it or be seeing themselves into the portal. And Eli Drinkwitz recently said there's been a lot of sloppy football so far in fall camp, what to make of that and the rest of Eli's remarks to the media recently, coming up here in just a second. First, though, passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With more than 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge victories. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On College Football podcast, because if you like my format, hey, guess what? Locked On College Football, the exact same thing, just gives you the national perspective. Spencer McLaughlin does a great job. In fact, I've been on that show a couple times, so I know from personal experience. If you want to figure out the portal, NIL, new college football playoffs, all that good stuff, again, check out Locked On College Football, available on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And, well, every day so far of camp has not been up to Eli Drinkwitz in incredibly high standards. He said, quote, "a lot of sloppy football. That is typical as you work your way through fall camp. Easy for me to say. You're never as far along as you'd like to be, but I think the players have had a really good attitude. They've been really coachable. Yada, yada, yada." Frankly, this is some Eli Drinkwitz playing good cop, bad cop here. If I were to bring back my segment from a couple weeks ago, coach speak or real talk, this is much more coach speak in my humble opinion. So I know that's kind of a big quote there. Hey, a lot of sloppy football, but I wouldn't make too much of that at this point. I think there's a lot of sloppy football happening throughout fall camps throughout the nation right now. And as I've said before, not a ton of intrigue on the Missouri offense this season in terms of position battles in fall camp. Most everything is pretty well set in stone at this point. That's not the case on defense. On the defensive edge in particular, well, other than Johnny Walker, there was a lot of unknowns at this point. A bunch of portal guys, a bunch of guys who have never actually been a starting level player at this level of football. But to me, the good news is, according to Eli Drinkwitz, he thinks that Johnny Walker, of course, the returner, and Zion Young have really elevated themselves. That's his word, along with Darius Smith. And the reason, in my opinion, that's good news, Zion Young, the transfer from Michigan State, Darius Smith, a transfer from Georgia, those were two guys that Missouri targeted pretty early in the portal process, a couple guys they wanted. So the fact that both of those players are indeed showing out early and getting shout-outs from Drinkwitz, that seems like a positive sign to me. It really does. And good news for the Tigers and, frankly, their player and portal evaluation. I will say evaluating players out of the portal got to be a heck of a lot easier than evaluating them out of high school. That's for darn sure. He also said, Drinkwitz, that is, also mentioned Eddie Kelly, Georgia Tech transfer, also Joe Moore, a Mizzou legacy, and also a returning player from last year's squad, and a younger player, Ja'Kai Lang, as well. That looks like those three guys, again, Kelly, Moore, and Lang, probably going to be fighting for that fourth edge position spot. Again, I wouldn't expect more than four guys to play on those two spots more often than not. Missouri does like to rotate guys there traditionally, but more than four, probably not. Also, Drinkwitz made it quite clear that Drew Pine is Missouri's number 2 quarterback. That competition is over if there really was anyone. I never expected anybody else other than Pine to be the number 2. That's for sure. And Drinkwitz mentioned he would like to get Pine some reps with the first team after this first scrimmage, which is happening today. He also praised his knowledge and leadership quite a bit. And because of that, well, some of you might be wondering, hey, why wasn't Sam Horn brought up in the make or portal segment? Well, that's a good question. And frankly, a lot of it has to do with Horn's unique circumstances and his injury timetable, because right now, as we know, Horn's going to miss all of the 2024 football season after undergoing Tommy John surgery after injuring his elbow while pitching for the Missouri baseball team. But again, because he's going to be out at least this season, spring football is certainly in doubt. I think spring baseball is even more in doubt, I would say. I don't even think that doesn't even seem like that's much of a possibility based on the traditional 1 year plus recovery time from that injury. But again, because of this, weirdly, if it weren't for the fact that Sam Horn were also a pitcher, well, maybe he would have seen the writing on the wall as a quarterback here after getting beat out by Brady Cook pretty decisively last season. Maybe he would have already seen the writing on the wall and transferred out of the program. On the other hand, though, of course, he wouldn't be in this strange situation if it weren't for the sport of baseball as well. So I just think that because Sam Horn is already here, because he's already entrenched, because Missouri is allowing him to still obviously stay on the roster as a quarterback in the SEC, at this point, what are his backup options? Is he going to be at a better program, a higher level of football? Doesn't really seem likely at this point in the process. His high school ranking and praise and all that good stuff, that seems like a long time ago at this point. At a certain point, you're going to have to prove what you can do on the college field, and so far, Horn hasn't really proven anything in terms of football. So the bottom line is he's going to keep his options open in terms of football and baseball, but clearly baseball has got to be his focus at this point. So that probably means that football-wise, he's going to be hanging around with Missouri. So far in fall camp, Missouri beat reporters, the few that have shown up, not me, by the way, the few who have shown up for those media appearances they've gotten some value out of it because they've gotten to talk to more players this season than they have in the past. Instead of a rotating group of a handful of players, they're expanding out much more. And fifth-year running back Nate Noel among the players who were talking to the media recently. And not Marcus Carroll, by the way, which I took as maybe a slight hint that Noel is maybe in the driver's seat right now for the number 1 spot. I think you'll see plenty of Carroll, maybe Jamal Roberts a little bit sprinkled in there as well, especially in September. Again, I still kind of think that Missouri's going to roll with somebody 75-80% of the time come October or so, but I did think that was kind of an interesting thing that Nate Noel was the one tabbed to talk to the media. Now, if the next time this happens, Marcus Carroll gets to talk to the media, then maybe you scrap this whole idea. But right now, raising my eyebrows a little bit and thinking this could be a slight hint from Eli Drinkwitz. But I know that Gabe DeArmond over at Power Mizzou was happy that more players have been available to the media. He likes to get a feel for their personalities and all that good stuff. But it's not all kumbaya between Gabe and the Missouri media department and Eli Drinkwitz and everybody, because at today's scrimmage, ain't none of us going to be there except for Matt Miller, an NFL scout. Boy, I'm really regretting my decision to stay away from fall camp, I said sarcastically. But let's talk a little bit more about this coming up here in just a little bit, and also just one of the all-time worst takes I've ever heard in my entire life. But first, let's talk about a FanDuel, because this time of year, I got to say, the sports calendar starts thinning out a little bit. Thank goodness NFL preseason is almost upon us, but really, baseball is the thing right now. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. And I have to say, the odds for the Royals and Cardinals World Series winners have shifted a lot here since the last time I read it. Both teams are around 60, 65 to 1. Maybe a week or two ago, now the Cardinals 111 to 1, the Royals 46 to 1 after a decent stretch of baseball here. Of course, both teams are going to face off in Kauffman Stadium on Friday and Saturday this weekend. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. It's FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So I asked you, the listeners, this past summer, should I be going out to Faurot Field and to the practice facilities and actually covering this team in a traditional sense? Because it really is just down to Power Mizzou and the Columbia Tribune to a very lessened extent these days, and also the Columbia Missourian, I suppose. Who else is really covering the team at this point? Well, ultimately, I decided to not really start covering the team for a lot of reasons, but a big one is because, frankly, it just doesn't seem like they want me around. And when I say me, I don't really mean me specifically. I'm talking about local media in general, the local commentariat, beat reporters, whatever you want to call it. It just seems like time and time again, of course, when it comes to breaking news, for example, well, they always give it to some national guy. And when it comes to, hey, we're going to open up the scrimmage today for one guy who's an NFL Network guy or a scout or whatever the heck he is. And meanwhile, the actual day-to-day people, the local people are pounding the pavement, getting out there all the time. They're just not getting a lot for their time or their effort, in my humble opinion. I'm just not into wasting my time. And you know what? Quite honestly, there is pluses to being removed from the players and the coaches and not having a personal relationship with those people. So I can actually do segments like the Make or Portal segment without feeling bad about it because, oh man, I like this guy and I hope he's not mad at me the next time I see him. Fortunately, I don't have to deal with any of that, and I do think that is an actual value-added proposition to this particular program. I do want to point out something, again, comments from Eli Drinkwitz here that I thought were interesting. And again, thank you to the people who actually do show up and capture all these quotes in the video and all that good stuff. So I get interesting tidbits like this. On the kick returning situation, Drinkwitz says, we haven't even gotten to the kick return phase yet, which may shock some of you because back in the day, hey, kickoffs were actually an important part of football, college football in particular I'm talking about. These days, not so much, but the Tigers are working on punt returns. And on that punt return battle, he says, quote, Drinkwitz, we had a lot of trash yards last year where we didn't field punts and inhibited our field position. The challenge for us is to make sure we're catching the punt and eliminating trash yards. Well, I totally agree with Drinkwitz that considering that it was single digits, the amount of punts that Missouri was actually able to return last season, not including fair catches, of course, well, then the absolute priority should simply be to catch the football and, again, eliminate trash yards, as Eli is calling them, when the ball bounces backwards 15 or 20 yards because you decided not to catch the football. That should absolutely be the priority, and I agree. And I also agree that punt returning in general should be a clear priority over kick returns, which have become, frankly, a farcical exercise in part of the football game where it becomes basically a long drive competition except with the field goal kickers. It's become utterly boring and predictable, and honestly, the fact that they aren't even working on it at this point makes sense. All you really, speaking of just catching the ball, well, that's basically all you have to do on kick returns these days too, except the stakes are a lot lower. You're normally not going to muff a kickoff that is immediately recovered by the opposition. And even if you muff the ball in the end zone, well, you still just get to sit on the thing and take it at the 25 anyway. So precious little time in fall camp, limited time, limited resources, all that good stuff. Makes a lot of sense to not waste much of that on the kick return unit at this point, in my opinion. And finally, this is not Mizzou related, but I just can't help myself at the end of the show here. Did any of you see that the NFL's Twitter account put out the best 100 players of 2024 coming up? Well, did you see Patrick Mahomes finish 4th? I mean, if that's not a horrible enough take, I mean, that's like having Michael Jordan in 1993 after he just won his 3rd championship. Yeah, let's put him 4th. Definitely Karl Malone and Charles Barkley and Hakeem Olajuwon are better than him. First of all, that's an insane take in general, but for the NFL to put that out there, again, that would be like if David Stern said that Michael Jordan was the 4th best player in the league. My mind can't even comprehend that. But somehow it's even worse because number 1 was Tyreek Hill. Now, don't get me wrong, folks. When it comes to actual football ability, nobody's been a bigger champion of Tyreek Hill over the years than me. But there's a slight problem with this logic. You see, Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill were on the same football team. They even won a Super Bowl together. But when the time came and it became clear that the Chiefs could not afford everyone on this football team, they traded Tyreek Hill. They did not trade Patrick Mahomes. Heck, they didn't even trade Travis Kelce. They didn't even trade Chris Jones. They could have traded those highly paid guys as well, but they didn't. They traded Tyreek Hill. And what happened? The Chiefs immediately won a Super Bowl. And then they won another one a couple years later. How the Miami Dolphins doing? Just wondering. I mean, really, I'm completely stupefied. And frankly, even if Skip Bayless had said that, I'd just been like, okay, let's just skip being Skip. But for the NFL, the actual league, to put that out there, and yes, if you're curious, Christian McCaffrey and Lamar Jackson ahead of Mahomes as well. I wish my head could actually spin like The Exorcist right now, because that's how I feel from that take. But regardless, thanks for putting up with my non-related Mizzou rant here at the end of the podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen. As always, for your second listen, check out Locked On College Football. Once again, if you like this format, you're going to love Spencer McLaughlin and his national takes on everything college football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So until next time, I'm John Miller, and thanks for listening to Locked On Mizzou.